In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use bias tape makers, which are basically metal pieces that help you take fabric and fold the two raw edges into the center, making bias tape. And then if you wanted to make double fold, you would just fold it in half and iron it again. They come in different sets. Sometimes there are 5. I have a set of 4, and there are numbers on them. This is millimeters. So 25, this means 25 millimeters is how wide your bias tape will be. So you would cut your fabric double that. Now, if you're in the US, just go to Google, do millimeters to inches, and then round up. So for example, this is a 2-inch strip. This is the tiniest one, which I have never done this one. It's 6 millimeters is on here. So 12 millimeters, when I took it to the calculator, was like 0.472441. So I cut it to 0.5. So I always round up to do my fabric. Many of these sets come with an awl. It reminds me of an ice pick. It's pointy, don't hurt yourself, but it's a great way to help pull the fabric through. If your set didn't come with that, you can use a pin, you can use a pencil. There are ways to get around that. So let's get one done. And we're going to do a little bit of experimenting here. Start with this size, which is the 12. We're going to try one, just fabric into the tool. The other one, we are going to starch, because it's usually recommended that you starch these because it is going to help the fabric not be so flimsy, and it will feed through your bias tape maker better, and you'll get better results. So let's just see what the difference is. You can use any kind of starch that you want. So I'm just going to make sure that that fabric is all wet. I'm just going to press that to dry the starch. So this is really the preferred method of doing this. We're just going to do the experiment with it starched and not starched in case you don't have starch and you just want to make bias tape and you just want to see if it's going to work. Now, when you are pressing fabric that has starch on it, you do not want to use steam because the goal is to dry the starch into the fabric and not to add moisture with the steam. Okay, so you can see how different that is. This is a lot firmer than this, but let's start with the non-starched ones. You're going to take your fabric and you're going to have it upside down, and you're going to have your tool so that this is face up, and you can see this line. Where the metal comes together is where the two edges should fold into there. So you'll also notice that I've cut that at an angle. That makes it feed through here a little bit easier, but you do lose the length of that on your bias tape, but we're going to do it this way. So you want to make sure when you feed it in, you want it to be even. You don't want it to be way up one side or it's not going to fold properly. Because this is the unstarched one, that was a little bit harder to get through. And now as we pull it out, you can see the metal does all the work. You don't have to steam your fingers, melt your nail polish, all that other stuff, but that seam is right there at that line. So you're going to just pull that through a little bit and then press that end. And then this is optional, but it makes it a little bit easier. Is if you pin it with 1 or 2 pins, it's going to keep it in place. So now you're just going to hold this and you're just going to iron as you pull back. So just pull a few inches, make sure it's staying even. And as you're getting a hang of it, you can just kind of move right along like that. Might want to use one of my favorite tools, the Quilter's clapper. So this Quilter's clapper basically helps to absorb the heat and press those seams better so that they don't kind of pop up. See, that's staying down a little bit better now. Okay, so that was the one we did where we just did raw fabric, no starch. So let's see if it's easier and if we get a crisper crease if we use the starched one. So again, we're just going to feed that in, and you can use the awl to just kind of push it through. Get that started, make sure our folds are coming in even. If it's a little bit off, just fix that, because if you don't start with the edges coming to the center, you're probably not going to end with it coming to the center. So you want to make sure you get off to a running start. So this is our starched. This is our not starched. You can see that the seams stayed flatter. The fabric is staying down flatter because the starch is helping to hold that pressing a little bit better than this, but this still works if you're in a pinch. So there's that size and that experiment. Another thing people often ask is, okay, what if you have really long strips and you have sewn them together? That's going to work just fine. You might have to go a little bit slower when you get to that part, but let's give it a try. And this time I'm going to try feeding it without cutting it at an angle. That's going to be our experiment for this one. So to do that, you do need to be more careful about how you put it in here, but we're not going to lose any of the length of our bias tape when we do it this way. But it is a little bit harder to feed. You want to make sure that gets lined up well at the beginning. And you want to make sure it's feeding evenly. So if it's going up the sides at all, you want it going evenly up each side. I don't press right up against the metal. I try and make sure I'm watching that the edges are staying right lined up with that line of the metal, because then you'll know that it's going to the center and you're going to get a nice piece of bias tape. Now we are getting close to where this seam is, so you're just going to need to make sure that that feeds through, and it might feel a little bit different. Yeah, I didn't really notice a difference on this one. The smaller the bias tape, the more you will feel that spot as it goes in, but for the larger ones, you're not even going to notice. But you also want to make sure you keep the heat on the fabric long enough for it to really get that fold. So there's our second size. And we did the square end on each end, so we didn't lose any. Like this one, you have this whole area that you might not be able to use. You'd have to cut that part off, and it would be even bigger on the larger one. So sometimes I just do that. Okay, so we have 4 different size tools that make 4 different size bias tape. And then you could make a double bias tape if you just then take it and fold it in half and press it again.